LinkedIn News.
The wonderful or the horrible thing about wrongdoing, often it is the case that we don't go back to the way that things were. That wrongdoing can rupture our lives so much that things will never be the same. And I think we really have to sit with that reality. And perhaps that will prevent us from doing wrongdoing. But I think we need to really sit with that reality as opposed to pushing for it's kind of like this perfectionist kind of happy ending story.
That's Myisha Cherry. I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better. Stay tuned for more from her on how we can reframe our perspectives on forgiveness in the environments we're in every day. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better, a personal development podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts who use science and story to share strategies for how we can flourish individually in relationship to others and the world around us. Today, I'm sitting down with Myisha Cherry. She's an associate professor of philosophy at UC Riverside, where she also serves as the director of the Emotion and Society Lab. Her research lies at the intersection between moral psychology and socio-political philosophy. And she's the author of several books, including The Case for Rage, Why Anger is Essential to Anti-Racist Struggle, and the book we're focused on today, Failures of Forgiveness, What We Get Wrong and How to Do Better. I wanted to talk to Myisha because forgiveness is a complex topic that touches every aspect of our lives in nuanced ways. The expectations of wrongdoing and forgiveness often go unexamined, along with how our identities inside of society shape those expectations. And I think in order for us to exist together in our work environments and communities, we must get better at how we examine forgiveness, express it or not, and how we repair when we are the wrongdoer. For example, in my own experience of forgiveness in work environments, I can think back to times where it was assumed that I'd forgive and quickly move on or act with grace because of my position or title within the hierarchy of an organization. Was it coupled with the fact that I'm a woman and a Black woman? I may not know for sure, but I can't help but wonder. In certain instances, I did forgive. I chose to move forward with grace, and I did it for myself. But in others, I chose not to. Myisha dove into this work because of a desire to illuminate the reality of our feelings and emotions and how they impact us every single place we go. So she's going to share how we can think about the emotion and experience of being wronged and forgiveness differently within ourselves, with our colleagues, our bosses, our friends and family, and even at a broader level. As a heads up, Myisha became fascinated by this work because of racial violence, and she does mention that in this episode. So with that, here's Myisha on forgiveness. I hope you enjoy.
Us as human beings, we are not only thinking beings, but we're feeling beings. And I think a lot of questions or philosophical questions come to mind just by listening to us as human beings and ordinary conversations. And particularly, I think, kind of mass conversations that we're having throughout the country. And so when it came to forgiveness, one of the things that I was noticing is that the topic of forgiveness was coming up as a topic of interest during, this is like Trayvon Martin era, 2012, and the recent rise of police shootings. And I was noticing at these press conferences that reporters were constantly asking the victims, can you find it in your heart to forgive? Can you find it in your heart to forgive? And I was just noticing that there was just this pattern. And so I was curious. I was curious about kind of what they took themselves to mean by that. I was curious about why they kept asking them to forgive and why this was a topic of relevance for this situation, but not like for other situations. I was interested in about what they thought could be accomplished through forgiveness. And I think what was fascinating about it is that there's no doubt that I felt that forgiveness was relevant, right? It's not like you're at a party and people, can you find in your heart to forgive? It seemed like a relevant question to ask, but a question that I felt uncomfortable with. And so anytime that happens, it's like, I need to figure out what this is.
Yeah.
And maybe I can get into a window of trying to answer some of these questions and perhaps offer some practical advice for us to do and not to do. So that's how the topic came into. I was just obsessed with why other people were obsessed with forgiveness. And I thought that we needed to kind of rethink what it was, what it can do, and what we shouldn't do with it.
if people are obsessed with forgiveness, they believe then that it means something.
Yeah.
And so what did you find as you started researching were like the dominant narratives of what it means to forgive?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it means to let go of anger. And I think we are afraid of anger. The book before I wrote this was on anger. We are afraid of anger if we're being sincere. I think a lot of times we're not being sincere in our criticisms about anger. But I think for the most part, a lot of people are afraid of anger. They are afraid of what people will do with their anger, particularly in the context that I was concerned about was racial violence. So that's one thing that I thought people meant by it. I also felt that people meant that if they introduced the question, or at least what they thought forgiveness could do, was like this magical underpinning, right? I mean, think about it in the shoes of a journalist who's introducing this question, right? They're writing a story. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, they're relating to the victims, but this is part of a narrative that they're trying to tell. So what are they trying to get at here, right? So we have these intense kind of violent situations. The families are hurting. Here's a good way to end it, right? And that is, if we introduce forgiveness perhaps into the conversation, then we can enter in some kind of resolution, some kind of reconciliation, some kind of repair. So that's what I think. I think what is predominantly in our minds when people think about forgiveness is to let go of anger. And also people love happy endings. I mean, who doesn't? Hence why I think forgiveness can be relevant for lots of people for a variety of reasons.
I definitely resonate with we are afraid of anger and what people will do with it. And in large part, I think it's because we don't really understand anger.
Yeah.
So we just assume if you're angry, I think a lot of us assume you're just always going to be angry or you're going to hurt someone. As you said, it might lead to aggression. But it's so funny to me. I mean, and funny may not be the right word, but it's so odd to me when you share the idea of us loving happy endings, and I think we do, but it's odd when you think in the context of someone who's been violenced, that our happy ending for someone who's experienced violence would be they forgave.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make me feel resolved. But I guess in like a close vein, what would make me feel resolved is like, did they have an okay life after? Were they able to find joy again?
Right. I mean, this goes back to why I was so fascinated, right? So I think you're perfectly right. I think in the context of injustice, I think the happy ending is justice. The happy ending is justice. But I think it also gives us, it reveals some things as well, right? What it reveals to us is that the question we ask is repair for whom? Or happy ending for whom, right? And I think in a context of like kind of intense kind of racial, whatever you want to call it, where everyone feels that they're implicated in some kind of way, whether you're white, you're black, or whatever. You want some kind of relief. You want some kind of repair. You want to feel safe when you walk down the street, right? So maybe if you introduce forgiveness, I mean, think about what happened after the Dylann Roof situation, right? You have these Time magazines, like, look at how this family forgave. And if one black person forgave, then everybody will forgive, and then I will feel less guilt, or I will feel more comfortable. So I think it goes back to reconciliation or happy endings for whom. And I think one of the mistakes that we make is that we don't think about the victim's happy ending. We think about our own, right? But I will also say, and this is what I'm trying to kind of expose in the book, the wonderful or the horrible thing about wrongdoing, often it is the case that we don't go back to the way that things were. That wrongdoing can rupture our lives so much that things will never be the same. And I think we really have to really sit with that reality. And perhaps that will prevent us from doing wrongdoing. But I think we need to really sit with that reality as opposed to pushing for it's kind of like this perfectionist kind of happy ending story.
What's an experience for you where you've gone, okay, I was done wrong and life won't be the same, or this part of my life won't be the same. And before this book, what did you do with that?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I like about the work that I do, it's just not an intellectual kind of exercise, right?
Yeah.
This is like real life. This is human lives. And my family life is kind of a perfect example of this. And so, I mean, I'm pretty candid about this. I talk about this in the book, where my mother was dying and my stepfather did not show up in the ways in which we expected him. To be a little bit more specific, while my mother was dying, he was basically cheating on my mother. He had brought another woman into my mother's house. And so when my sister and I caught wind of this, after months of like, if you can imagine if you had a loved one who is in a process of just being sick and you have optimism that they will get well, and then things go wrong, and then they leave the hospital, intensive care, and then they go into a hospice. Like that was our life for a whole year. And to have that experience with, we thought we were growing close to our stepfather, but to find out that he was violating my mother's trust and our trust was very, very, very heartbreaking. So I had to really figure out what to do with that. And I think when we were going through the process of my mother's death, my stepfather comes to me right before the funeral when we're at the house, and he comes to me and he's begging for my forgiveness. And, I basically told him, you should ask forgiveness from my mother and your God. Like I'm not here to give that to you. So let's fast forward a decade later. I received a phone call from my sister, and my sister basically told me that my stepfather was trying to get in contact with me, and I hadn't spoke to him since that day. And I basically told my family, please do not give him my information. Immediately, my sister says to me, you haven't forgiven him? Like, it was like a mystery of sorts. Like, you haven't forgiven him? And I remember she's telling me, it was like, Myisha, you gotta forgive him. And I remember, after that conversation, I sat with it a little bit, and I had yet to write the book, but I was still thinking about these ideas. I sat with it a little bit, and it dawned on me, I have forgiven him, right? Just our endings look different. Like for my sister, her forgiveness was, I'm going to let go of anger, and I'm going to allow him, back into my life, however degree that is. My account of forgiveness is, I'm going to let go of my hatred towards him. I am also going to decide not to plot any kind of revenge. And I'm going to do it for the memory of my mother. And I'm going to do it for my own kind of sanity. Our forgiveness looked different, but I forgave nonetheless. And I think my sister was so surprised about my response. And I think if anyone's looking at our two different reactions, I think the problem is people will have a tendency to think that it's my sister who's the forgiver and not me. And so in some ways, the book is trying to redeem people like me. It's like, hey, you can still engage in forgiveness. It's going to look different.
Yep.
There's no need to, feel pressured to make your forgiveness look like somebody else's, but be confident and content with the decisions that you've made for the reasons that you made them. And that's one of the purposes of the book.
There are so many limitations on forgiveness. So like, you describe, it's like the limitation of forgiveness being, the identity of a forgiver.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of like cross-sectional layers of like, if you're male or female, what race you're in, all those things. How am I supposed to show up now? I'm supposed to be graceful and open and whatever. But that there are some serious limitations then around how we choose to forgive and the fact that we still identify as someone who is forgiven.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to illuminate for us to recognize the presence of like the hierarchical stuff, right? So I think the power dynamics of just race and just gender. Let's just talk about gender, right? So who is expected to forgive in our American context, right? We want women to be forgivers of their wayward husbands, but we will take a wayward husband to be like a punk per se if they do the same thing to their wives, right? So you already see that in that sense, forgiveness can immediately become gendered. That the norm of who is supposed to forgive changes depending on what bodies kind of occupy a particular space, right? Forget the wrongdoer. Let's just say infidelity is the wrongdoing, but who we expect to forgive is going to change depending on the gender. So that's one power dynamic. I've been talking about the racial dynamic, right? Kind of implicitly, but explicitly, like why are we asking Black women to forgive? And why is forgiveness becoming relevant in the context of racial violence when Black people are victims in ways that it wasn't when white folks are the perpetrators? And so I want us to see how power, even in this moral practice that we think is relevant called forgiveness, we think, oh, it's just all good all the time. But when you have social dynamics and power involved in all that, who we expect, what we expect, how quick you ought to do it, begin to manifest. And I'm trying to get us to be aware of that, cautious of that, and to do things quite differently.
So what's your kind of, as we morph this conversation from like what society expects to what you've learned and what you're exploring, what's your new sort of definition or way to describe what it means to be a forgiver?
So I would say the ways in which I've described it so far is kind of a narrow way of thinking about it, right? So that's the anger only, that's the riding off into the sunset together, which I kind of call full reconciliation, right? I think that's a very narrow, I don't want to say that's wrong, right? I just want to say that that's not right for everybody, right? That's a narrow way of conceiving of what forgiveness looks like. And I've just come to learn that forgiveness is broad. And it can include a variety of what I call kind of moral practices, things that we do in the name of morality. So it could be the letting go of anger, but it also could be the letting go of hatred. All right. It could be the letting go of anger, but it also could be the letting go of contempt. It could also be the refusal to engage in any kind of revenge. It could be I just changed my behavior towards you, right? So as opposed to like leaving the room every time you enter it, right? I was like, I hold space with you, right? But whatever thing that you engage in is always going to have one of three goals, right? So either you're going to do it in order for the goal of repair, right? So you can repair anything. It could be to repair your heart, or it could be repair that relationship, right? It could be to get some kind of relief for yourself. And I think this is probably a popular, what people mean about don't do it for others, do it for yourself. I think what they're pointing to is a kind of relief, like there's something that needs to be done within you that you need to relieve. Or it could be done for the sake of reconciliation, right? Perhaps you want to do it to reconcile your family members, or perhaps you want to reconcile with the wrongdoer yourself. But that reconciliation is not always going to be like the riding off into the sunset kind, right? So I can reconcile with you into the sense that we're not going to be best friends. We're just not going to be enemies, right? I'm trying to broaden us to kind of rethink what this stuff means. And I think if we broaden what we take forgiveness to be and what we take forgiveness to be able to do, then I think the problems that I encountered with my sister, or the problems that journalists put on the burden of victims, I think the burdens, the kind of disappointment, and the kind of redoing of harm to victims will cease as a result. It's kind of messed up that we think that all it takes is for a forgiver to forgive and everything will be all good. And what we don't recognize is that to clean up the wreckage of wrongdoing requires not only work from a victim, but it also requires work from a wrongdoer, requires work from a community. So much so that sometimes it may require for the community and the wrongdoer to do their part first before a victim can even do anything. The way that I would put it is that repair is a community effort. It's a group project. And I think when we introduce forgiveness, we're basically saying, hey, I know you were wronged, but won't you go ahead and do all the work to make it better?
Uh-huh.
And I'm trying to get us to say that that's exactly what's happening here. When we ask the victim to forgive 24 hours after their relative has been killed, or when we ask our relative to constantly forgive every time they come to the family reunion, not taking them serious, not taking their pain serious, like that's exactly what we're doing. And I want to remind us that that's not what it requires. It requires all of us to make things better. So we need to stop overburdening the victim, thinking that only their forgiveness can make everything all right. And even the practice of forgiveness, I'm also trying to broaden what that means as well, right? So it's not just the forgiver forgiving, it's the wrongdoer apologizing, it's the community coming to the victim's defense, it's the community holding the wrongdoer accountable, right? It really is a group project. And I think more than the forgiver, it's these other entities that fail at forgiveness that makes repair more difficult.
Yeah. Do you see or have you found there are situations when we should not forgive?
Let me just say this one thing. You know, I want to tell anyone who's been a victim of wrongdoing, you can do whatever you want. I don't want to take your agency or your autonomy away. You know what's best for you. And I'm just defending and reminding the victim, it's okay. It's okay. If you want to hold back your forgiveness, it's okay. If you want to forgive, it's okay. I mean, I would say this, that is a question that people have tried to answer in philosophy. So there's a lot of work suggesting that, like, if the wrongdoing is like egregious, like genocide, then, you know, never forgive. But yeah, I don't think I have an opinion on the matter. Nothing I feel strong about, because I think it all depends. I think there's moments in which you say to yourself, 5 years ago, you know, I would never forgive somebody if they do this to me.
Right.
And then 5 years later, you're like, I've grown, right? I think it's correct for me to say that there's reasons to think that you oughtn't forgive immediately. Like, I'm down for making that claim. And why not immediately? Well, I think you need to sit with what happened, right? There needs to be kind of an understanding about what happened. And not just you need to, kind of get a feel about, okay, what just happened before you come about a resolution, because forgiveness is kind of like a vehicle for resolution. You need to sit with what happened. But also, this is very important, I think the wrongdoer also needs to sit with what happened, right? And if we immediately go through the process of forgiveness, what that can do for a wrongdoer is not allow them to kind of like hold themselves accountable and to kind of know that there's repercussions, or like to have empathy. Like you're taking that process, that human process away from them. So even if you don't want to do it for you, I think it's important to do it for them, and not to mention kind of community members or family or children or whatever who's witnessing it. So there's reasons not to forgive immediately. I also think that there's reasons not to forgive immediately for kind of self-protective reasons, right? So like, if you forgive immediately, you don't know if the person is really remorseful, and so you're opening yourself up to harm. And what is required is kind of time or evidence that you are safe, right? So yeah, I can make those arguments all day, right. But it's interesting that you would ask this question to me because I was just reading this morning. I was reading Martin Luther King Jr.'s collection of sermons called "Strength to Love," and he has a line in the chapter about fear. And he's talking to white folks and he's like, white folks have a fear of black folks because they know basically that they've done wrong to them. And so they're getting some power and they're afraid that what they've done to them, black folks would do to them. And then I'm like, yeah, you're right, Martin Luther King. and then the next line says, but black people are forgiving people. I was like, wait, hold up, Martin Luther King.
Like, wait, this is not, no.
What's going on?
The record's
What's
scratched.
going on? So like, what? So this thing of like, oh, black people have already forgiven and they were already forgiving you for all the like, I don't want to say that either, right? And I think there's problems with saying that. Now, here's the curious thing. You asked the question and I'm wondering if you have an answer.
Yeah, I think it depends. I mean, my answer would be yours probably. Like, I don't know if it depends on the transgression because I can't necessarily say that there's something that's so big that you'll never forgive it.
Yeah.
Because there's so much around it. There's so much context of like, well, what happened after and what happened before and how does the whole story come together?
Right.
So I think, I don't know that I would say that anyone should pick certain circumstances, to your point too, where they wouldn't forgive because life changes and you have more experiences. And with more experiences, you see that life can be unexpected and people can do things that don't make you happy, right? And all of us can be wrongdoers. And so I think some of the obsession around forgiveness, too, is that any of us know that at any point in time, we have been the wrongdoer, right? And we've been the victim. And maybe we haven't done some of the terrible things we're talking about, but we've hurt people. Mm-hmm. And we're going to keep hurting people. Like it's almost impossible not to hurt people as long as you're in a relationship in some way, shape, or form. So I would say that, is what you're talking about with the time is actually interesting to me because you mentioned a couple emotions that I don't know that people would actually know the difference between. Like, there's contempt, there's anger, there's hatred, right? And I don't know that people would say, like, I think hatred and anger are different,
Right.
So as I'm thinking about those emotions of what happens in the amount of time it elapses between the wrongdoing itself and then what goes on for the wrongdoer and for the victim, there are obviously a ton of emotions they experience, right?
Right.
I think all are actually probably really important. And I'm curious if you found that there were certain emotions that were commonly experienced and how we transmute those emotions once we go through them into something that's maybe more powerful. And I guess that's maybe your point too, which is relief.
Yeah. It's interesting. I like the picture that you just shown because I think that's a true picture. Typically, when we think about people having a range of emotions, it's only irrespectable to the grieving process, but not the forgiving process, right? So we know that there's stages of grief. You're going to go through this, you're going to go through denial, then anger, then like come back bargaining, etc. But we don't really take in consideration that you can also have that range when you've been victimized. Mm-hmm. For me, when I've been wronged, I have confusion, anger. I'm gonna plot. Then I bargain and be like, maybe it wasn't what it was. Then I'm in denial. Then you try to give people the benefit of doubt. Then you go back to anger, like compassion, and then like. So I want to make room for that. I want to make room for that. I think the question of which emotion do you get rid of, or do you think you should get rid of as part of the forgiving process, is interesting. I think whatever kind of emotion seems to be dominant, right? So for me, when it came to my stepfather, I think for me, it wasn't necessarily anger. It was disappointment. And I had a very different kind of emotion. I think for me, it was like contempt in a way. For me, the way that I saw him was, you can't even deal with this. What kind of human are you? Like, if you can't deal with this with a sense of dignity and respect, then you are just beyond the pale, right? Mm-hmm. And so I realized after, the emotions that I was experiencing, it was the contempt that was running deep, right? It was the contempt that I felt guilty about after several years, right? Because you grow, right? I was in my 20s at the time, I was still young out here, right? And then I started making my own mistakes, right? You know what I mean? And particularly when you have contempt, you don't think that person even have it in them to change, right? Because they're not really a full human anymore at a certain extent. And so when I realized that, when I would think about that situation, his face will always pop in my head, and like a monstrous or not even a full human being, I realized, oh, something needs to let go of, right? So in answering the question about which one, I think it's whatever the one is really like, really having the, one might say, quote unquote, the power in your life, the one that's still remaining after a while, the one that perhaps is disrupting you or disrupting your way of relating in any kind of way. I think that's the emotion that perhaps you want to deal with. And it's not to say, like I say in the book, and people can read it and go deeper, if I would have kept my contempt, maybe, it still probably would have been all good. But I decided to let that, I decided I needed to let that go for reasons in which I've said. So that's how I figured out. Like, I had a range of emotions, but that contempt thing stayed with me. Yeah.
And that was the one that you went, okay, this is the one you felt guilty and were like, I'm ready to let this one go.
I had to do some work about that. Yeah. I felt like I needed to do some work with that.
Before we go on break, let's recap. We have to be better at thinking about the role we play in forgiveness and the role we're assuming others should play. Also, there are instances in which someone can choose not to forgive and still move forward. We'll be back in just a few minutes to keep exploring that last topic. And we're back with Myisha Cherry. I also think part of the reason maybe we're obsessed with forgiveness is also our obsession with not having regret. And our challenge with remorse. What have you found in your lab and in your work around maybe the value of actually feeling those emotions so that we can do something different next time, hopefully?
Here's the thing about the emotions that I'm very interested in is the kind of emotions that I'm interested in is the ones that no one wants to feel. And they don't want you to feel them either, right? But they're the most powerful emotions, right? And in philosophy, we call them negative emotions. And basically, negative emotions is not that we think negative about the person. It's just that it's a negative evaluation, right? So joy is not a negative evaluation. Joy is like, hey, things are good, right? Negative emotions is, no, something happened, think something is wrong, right? But we don't like to feel those. So not only do we like happy endings, we love to feel good. I mean, it's, it is what it is.
We're human, yeah.
Yes, we love to feel good. But here's the interesting thing. Nowadays, we think we have 50,000 friends on Instagram. The reality is, at the end of the day, we probably got 50, right? So the reality is, we're just like we were as hunter-gatherers, right? That's our comfort zone. That's the number that we were really made to operate in. That's why we don't really have the capacity beyond a certain kind of like investment into other things. That's what we're made for. So why the 50? And hunter-gatherer, these small communities, we relied on each other so much. We needed each other so much. And when those relationships was disrupted, it literally meant our death. We needed them to survive, right? So how do you continue to be a member of the group? Well, when you mess up, you got to apologize. You got to do some stuff to make that right because you don't want to die. Right? To stop you from messing up or to correct you immediately, there was anger, right? And so you go, okay, I know what that anger means. I know exactly what that means. Let me change my ways. And then you had to sit with what you've done so you won't do it again, right? Because you don't want to do it again. So you'd rather feel this regret than do that thing that will ban you from the community, right? So these emotions are important for our communal life, right? Which our communal life is a moral life, right? It's a life of connection and community and building and living among each other. And that requires something of us, right? And so these emotions are built in us to communicate. Anger is built to communicate, hey, get it together, or there's going to be repercussions. And regret is there to communicate, okay, I don't want to do that again because this hurts. Let me make sure I don't make that mistake again, right? So they're there for a reason. It's the way that we improve. I can't imagine a moral life without moral emotions. Like these emotions are playing a role in our lives, and I know they're uncomfortable. And I tell people all the time when I give lectures on anger, and they're like, but anger feels so bad. Yeah, but it ain't about you feeling good. It's about you being good, right? So just sitting, I try to encourage people, sit with the discomfort. Sit with it. Trust me, if you sit with it now, you won't have to sit with it for too much long, and you probably won't have to sit with it again. And imagine what someone else who's on the receiving end of your wrongdoing, imagine what they're sitting with, right? Even that empathetic process can be hard for people because it doesn't feel good. So
it hurts.
this goes back, exactly. And it's supposed to, because we need each other more than we think we do. Our survival depends on that. So feel all the things, learn from all the things, get back up and try again.
So I want to go back because this idea of social media, of like we have so many friends or followers, and yet we haven't evolved enough to understand deeply that like we actually don't have the capacity for that many, and we can still be judged by so many more than we have the capacity for.
Yeah.
How does this then tie into cancel culture? I mean, I will say I'm not actually a proponent of it. So like I'm curious then how we extend some sense of empathy or kindness to others on platforms that don't remind us that we're all humans.
Yeah. You know, I try not to tell nobody what to do, but like these apps, what it's called social media, it's not good for us. In this present form, it's not good for us. It's just not good for us. And if you recognize that it's not good for you, that it's not doing good things for you, that's an indicator that perhaps, you know, you should not give that to yourself. So I just think we need to do away with it, to be honest with you. So that's what I'll say in that particular regard. So as far as like cancel culture, or what we call cancel culture, which I think a lot of people may have different definitions. I'm going to trouble the term just a little bit.
Sure.
Cancel culture, cancel. So, I mean, what do we mean by canceling per se, right? So is it opting out of a kind of relationship, whether that's a consumer relationship? So I'm going to cancel Cartier, which means I'm no longer like going to be a consumer of them. Okay, all right. Does it mean I'm on block anybody from getting this money out here?
Yeah.
Am I going to expose like them doing any abusive behavior and like bring that to, like I need to be clear about the cancel part for one, but also the culture part. Because we tend to say this word very, very, very loosely, and I don't really know what that means because depending on what you think cancel means, I would say, well, there's always been a culture because that's just what culturally we humans do. We hold people accountable. We're always getting in and out of relationships. That's always just been the thing for us. And I don't want to be like a philosophical like bro here, but I want to separate what I've just said with something that I think we need to give a new word to or word for. And that is like the uninformed piling on with no information that ruins people's lives. Right? To me, I think that's egregious. Then I'm no longer going to support Kevin Hart or like, you know what I mean? Like, so I'm interested in those cases because I find those fascinating on a psychological level. Like when we just hear a rumor or hear something, we don't check or verify ourselves, and then we just come for it and try to ruin people's lives. Like, to me, that's problematic. I don't even know if I want to call that cancel culture. Or is that really what we're talking about? And we're putting a whole bunch of other stuff under that particular umbrella. Because if that is the case, that's not what you're talking about in relationship to extending empathy, right? So there's another case. So let's try to bring out a case in which empathy would be relevant. Someone makes a mistake.
That's what I was thinking.
In which there's still room for redemption. And let's be a little bit more specific about who this person is. Usually it is a celebrity. And so they said something and we're like, oh, this person is now racist or this person's whatever. And even that judgment don't really match up with the evidence. They just made a mistake. And we have a tendency to think, well, if you messed up once, that there's no coming back from that. And with that, we agree. I agree with you on that particular end. But then there's just some people we're talking about patterns who are just consistently transphobic. And for me and my money, we're not supporting that. Now, I don't have the energy to go online and tell other people not to do it, but some people do. And so it'll be fascinating. Like a fascinating class is getting my students to say, okay, so what's so different about that case than the other case and how people respond and how we should deal with it? And my empathy is more in the first case, right? I know there are things that we say when a mic is in our face, right? I get that. We don't think things through. And we're also learning. Right, learning every day about what we should and shouldn't say. And so I do want to give space to people making mistakes. I do. I don't think people's lives should be destroyed because of a mistake. If that was the case, then none of us would have livelihoods. So I totally get that. The question is, okay, how do we make that proper distinction? And where is it that we draw the line? And it goes back to the power dynamic. We have a tendency to want to extend empathy to people in powerful positions who make the largest patterns of mistakes over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then we end up getting, see, I'm about to go on a tangent.
But we pull it. No, I hear you. Yeah, listen, now my big question about cancel culture is about mistake making. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Is like, how do we handle mistake making, and why have we've gotten so harsh? I feel like so much harsher, especially online, when it comes to mistake making and the way that we handle that.
Let me just say this.
Yeah.
Don't you think the reason why we've gotten harsher is because we've gone out of our 50 minimum?
Yes.
And we're no longer treating people like members of our tribe. We're not doing what we're built to do.
Right. If someone was in your community, you would not do what you would do to somebody. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, I was thinking about a personal example a week and a half ago. In the midst of actually preparing for this, I hurt someone. And it wasn't a crazy transgression, but it was enough that I felt so much remorse, and like remorse and regret were in my mind. And my immediate response was, this person wasn't physically around me, was to reach out to them through a voice note and just be like, I'm so sorry. Like all I wanted to do was find every way I could to get the response that they forgave me.
Yeah.
That was all I wanted, because I wanted relief. And so in noticing that, I was like, okay, you have to pause, because when I go back to the other side of being someone on the other end of any sort of transgression, I actually get really frustrated when someone is like trying to get me to forgive them quickly, or just says sorry right away. Because I'm like, you don't even know what you're sorry for yet. We still have to talk about that. And I don't even know yet, because I still have to process. So I forced myself to like sit back and just go, wow, I'm really uncomfortable. And I have to move forward. It was a work day. I got to get stuff done. I can't just sit in this discomfort and do nothing. I have to sit and like, one of the biggest challenges was in our busy lives. And in this day, it was a busy day. How do I hold this pain of feeling remorse and regret while also having to move forward with the rest of my life and try to be kind to others while I'm not feeling great myself?
Yeah, it's interesting, because as you're talking, I'm thinking about a regretful situation that I'm going to have for the rest of my life, right? This goes back to my mother, and I talk about this at the end of my book. My mother passed away when I was in my 20s. The last time I talked to a 20-year-old, if I can give like their psychological makeup, they're selfish. They're like all about them, and don't encounter an ambitious 20-something-year-old, right? That's a whole new other thing, right? So that was me in my 20s. And I have a tendency to think, there's moments now that I think, damn, if my mom would have got the adult version of me, of a daughter, right? And so what I have to live with is not being the best. Let's put a stepfather aside, right? Because there's other people who messed up, which is me. Not going to see her as much as I wanted to, or much as I should have, right? Giving her the attention that I think that she desperately wanted from me. And I was just focused on other things, thinking that I had time. And I used to have dreams, and a lot of my nightmares is waking up in the middle of the night and having a dream that she was actually alive, right? And recognizing that that's not the case. So there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do in regards to my mother. I live with that regret. That's just something that I feel all the time. I just have to do it. It is what it is. The way in which I try, as far as action is concerned, I try to make sure that I'm not neglectful in my other relationships, right? So the ambitious person is still there. She's just not in her 20s.
Correct.
So I have to balance. Okay, my family, that is my sister and my nieces and my nephews, they live in another state. Okay, how can I be more active in their lives? Because we can't use distance as an excuse anymore. How can I be more active in their life? What kind of investments can I make? Let me check in with them every week. Let me show an investment into them. Christmas time, let's get on it. There's no excuse. You got to be there. You got to be present. And that's one of the things that I'm learning from that situation. Because if anything was to happen to my sister, who's very sickly, I don't want to have that regret that I have with my mother. I want to say that I finally grew up.
Yeah.
And I was there, right? And so I can't do it for my mother, but I can do it in my other relationships. And so to me, that's the action component. But here's the thing, managing all those things at once is my life. I don't know how I do it. I just try to hey, I'm going to have this regret, but I also got this other stuff because I don't want more regrets in my life. So I got to take care of this other stuff. But yeah, it's possible, but it's tough.
Have you, in that process, forgiven yourself?
Yeah. If anything, I would say about, is there anything you shouldn't forgive about that question in regards to other people? I totally changed my perspective when it comes to the self, right? And I want to say that when it comes to forgiving the self, it's quite different from other people, so much so that I think it's something that we need to do, not quickly, but I think it's something that we need to do. And here's a clear kind of answer to that. You live with yourself. And because you live with yourself, to not reconcile with yourself or not to engage in kind of repair of yourself is a kind of self-harm, right? And so I do suggest that we go through the process of forgiving ourselves. And it is a process. But I think it's important for us to undergo that process and not to think all the time that we need the victim to forgive us in order to do that. I mean, in some ways, they can indicate to us that we're moving too quickly. But we also have to respect people's decisions and, that it may be the case that they can never forgive us. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't forgive ourselves. And I think that's an important thing for us to learn, live with. Oh, you forgave yourself, but still someone else haven't forgiven you.
Right. I mean, that's what's so hard for me. It's like someone's walking this earth alive and maybe like throwing darts at a little dartboard and thinking of me, like, and that I'm supposed to feel that and know that that's possible. And then I still have to forgive myself and still have to move forward.
Yep. And recognizing that your process, given what I just said, you have to live with yourself. It's not the same reasons that the other person has. They're just two different beasts. And I totally get you. I mean, I think people who have their moral lives together are indeed affected when people are still hurt by what we've done. I think that's the beauty. I think, if anything, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's like an indicator that like you're living a moral life.
Of a rich moral life. Yes, with mistakes, but a rich moral life. But, here's the thing. That's the aftermath of wrongdoing.
Yeah.
Things don't always go back or even go back to anything. So, yeah, and learn how to live with that, even if it doesn't feel so good.
Yeah. What is what's your recommendation on how we repair when we are ready to forgive?
When we feel that we're ready to forgive, I think we need to make sure that we are doing it for our reasons alone. There's a lot of social pressure. And I'm talking about just in our families, for example. So just making sure that we're doing it for our reasons. I think we need to be aware that our forgiveness is not a golden ticket. And so even after we have forgiven, we should, at least have a little expectation that we're still going to have to live with what was done with us or done to us. And that doesn't mean that we haven't done forgiveness right or perfectly. It's just the aftermath of what happens in the aftermath of wrongdoing. I would say for those who have received the forgiveness of another, I think it would be the same kind of recommendation that we might think that, after hearing that this person has forgiven us, it's all good. You'll feel better. But as we've been talking about, you still will have to perhaps live with that regret. But how do we make ourselves better?
I love that. I'm going to have you complete these 3 statements. The first is better humans are
always striving to be better.
Better work is
passion and one's own personal standards and not the standards of others.
And a better world has
light in it.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here, Myisha. This was great.
Thank you.
I so appreciate it.
Thank you for this.
That was Myisha Cherry, Associate Professor of Philosophy at UC Riverside and author of Failures of Forgiveness, What We Get Wrong and How to Do Better. If this conversation resonated with you, share it with the first person who comes to mind. You never know how it could help them out. And support other people like you in finding our show by leaving us a rating before you go. While you're at it, write a 1-sentence review telling me and the team what you love about Everyday Better. And as always, you can get me in your inbox by signing up for our weekly personal development newsletter, giving you practical tips on how to level up with small steps every day. Look for it in the show notes or find it at linkedin.com/everydaybetter. That's linkedin.com/everydaybetter. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. This episode was produced by Grace Rubin. Asaf Gadron is our sound engineer. He makes sure we sound good in the studio. Joe DeGiorgi mixed our show. Enrique Montalvo is the executive producer of LinkedIn Editorial Productions. Dave Pond is head of news production. Courtney Koop is head of LinkedIn Original Audio and Video. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.